Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special edition of the New York Times. My name is Eitan. Today we have Eitan Levine. Everyone knows me. If you're listening to this, you know who I am. You're following me on my channel. If you've been following me for the past couple of weeks, you know that the NYC mayoral election is officially ending tomorrow. It is 4:07 p.m. on Monday night. Election day. Early voting has already happened. This has been one of the most contentious elections that I've definitely, I've ever witnessed in my life. Some of the presidential elections, obviously, a little bit more intense, but when it comes to like a local level, this election has been completely wild to watch. And one of the interesting sub-stories from this election has been the Satmar Hasidic voting block in Brooklyn. For those unfamiliar, the Satmar Hasidic voting block is about 80,000 to 100,000 voters who are very cherished and very sought after when it comes to local New York elections, specifically the mayoral elections. Over the past couple of days, there has been a division and there's been a little bit of a riff in the Satmar voting block in a way that I didn't fully understand. Like in my mind, they always vote as one, but there were some rabbis that came out and endorsed Mamdani. There was a rabbi that came out and endorsed Mamdani, and then that caused the Satmar, a couple other rabbis to endorse Cuomo. So there's a whole back and forth, and there's a little bit of just like lack of clarity on what's happening over there. So I wanted to bring in an expert in the field, Jacob Kormbluh, who is the senior political correspondent for The Forward, who has been covering this better than anyone else has been covering it, to be honest. Jacob, thank you so much for having me on. For coming onto the podcast. I really appreciate it. Tomorrow the election is happening. My audience, and I think a lot of people, are a little bit unclear about this concept of the Satmar Hasidic voting block. Can you just tell me a little bit about, what makes this block such an important block that in the days leading up to the election, mayoral candidates are spending a lot of time courting this group?
So first of all, thank you for having me on. I echo your earlier remarks that unfortunately this election will be over very soon. But, we still have fun times after that. It's interesting that you mentioned, obviously, that it's a group that is very sought after. It's because this is the largest Hasidic voting bloc that follows rabbinic orders, right? And so in municipal elections, right, not in national elections where everybody is sort of independent to vote for the candidate of their choice, when it comes to citywide, statewide elections, what they prefer is to come to a candidate of their choice or a favorite who is going to win to offer them the support with a block of votes, right? Either to preserve their interests or to flex their muscles to show their influence. In this election, with all the talk about Mandani's rhetoric, about Mandani's stance on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, on Mandani's positions, there hasn't been sort of like, oh, here are 3 or 4 candidates like we had in the primary, and let's choose who is, would best represent us or who would preserve our interests. Because there was, on one hand, Governor Cuomo, and before that, Eric Adams, who said, here, I'm your ally. I've been there ready for you. I've given you, and I'm here to stop Mamdani, so you have no choice but to vote for me. And Mamdani was the unconventional person, a Muslim, democratic socialist who Jews accused of anti-Semitism. It's just not the type of person that first of all, to legitimize his candidacy, but also to vote for, because we don't know what the consequences are to supporting him. So there was sort of that, divide where Cuomo tapped in to that fear, the concern in the Jewish community, that he almost left no room to doubt that he's going to get their support, and hence was that surprise yesterday, which was building over a few months. If you followed my reporting, Mandani actually has extended this olive branch to the Hasidic community, especially to the Satmar community back in the primary, when there were divisions about whether to rank Andrew Cuomo first or Adrian Adams. And there was sort of, okay, well, we understand that you're supporting Cuomo because he's the front runner and he's likeliest to win. But here, let me offer why I'm not an anti-Semite, right? Like, just meet with me to understand. Now, you also have to look back, in order to understand where this stems from. Mamdani's senior aides are of Jewish faith, right? And so we are potentially talking about this sort of Muslim, democratic socialist who doesn't understand the community. Yes, he might not understand the broader Jewish community or agree with them on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but his aides are progressive Jews who have worked in the state legislature, who know that community. One of his aides was chief of staff to one of the assembly women who is a democratic socialist who represented that neighborhood, Hasidic Satmar neighborhood in Williamsburg. And so there was
Can I ask a question on that? As much as these are, they may understand the community, these are like left-wing progressive Jews. This isn't like modern Orthodox Jews who kind of like maybe culturally relate a little bit more. So does that not come into play here where it's two complete opposite ends of the spectrum that are trying to negotiate and agree on this candidate?
Yeah. So there's two things. One is you don't have to actually agree with a certain person or be of the same faith to actually have mutual interest, right? That's number one. And second, you just have to understand the dynamics and power struggle. And in the Hasidic community, this is possibly part of a larger conversation for another time, which is the power struggles within the community of which rabbi to follow, who is the leader, who gets to decide which candidate or where the money diverts from, or on policy, whom to fight and whom to embrace.
I want to take a minute on this specifically, and then I want to go back to the Mamdani thing, to the Mamdani Cuomo election. Talk to me historically about this voting bloc. How have they voted in the past? How have politicians been able to court them? What kind of assurances are these blocs looking to get from these candidates?
So I think it's the same issues that Mandani actually has managed to promise them, which is they have two, when it comes to mayoral endorsements, right? We're talking now about the mayor's race, right? When we're talking about gubernatorial or mayoral endorsements, there are two things that they look at, right? One is the polls, who is the likeliest to win, the favorite to win. And second, who we can most agree on that we share either mutual interest on certain policies or that you can promise us to preserve those interests. So in past years, you had the vow to protect yeshivas from government interference, right? For them, this is a very important issue. Andrew Cuomo was governor when these laws were put into place. There was this whole debacle a few years ago when Kathy Hochul ran for governor, right, for a full term. She sought the endorsement of Satmar. They were like, we don't necessarily want to endorse you because here we have Lee Zeldin, who is a Republican who's promising to stand with us, and you were part of government when these laws were put into place. And she obviously managed to convince them, at least one of the part which we are talking about, which is the Ahronim sect, which is a majority in Kiryas Joel. They are the minority in Williamsburg, but they're still a very powerful voting bloc.
And, but if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Hochul just trying to get her kids into Beis Yaakov? And that was a joke.
Kids, by her new grandchild.
Yeah. So you're saying the Ahronim? Okay, so the Ahronim, big in Kiryas Joel, but also that means, but they're not big in Brooklyn, in the places that vote, correct? In this specific election.
They are, but there's just a larger Satmar sect, which the other faction, the rival faction, which they call in the political terms, they call them the Zalonim, they are just the larger group.
What is
They have just
that
more
number?
families.
What is that number breakdown like? So it's about, you said it's like 80,000. Like the entire Satmar block
No.
is about
Well, the
80,000
number
to
80,000, no. So the number 80,000 is possibly the number of Hasidic votes that vote by block.
Got it.
But that is across the 5 boroughs. A big chunk of that is in Williamsburg, but also in Borough Park, and Midwood.
What are those numbers
Satmar
like?
is the largest of those groups.
Got it. What is Satmar's voting numbers like?
They're on the. They are at least, according to the data from recent elections, in the primaries and in general, between 6,000 to 12,000 for one of the factions, right? So if you look back in 2013, when Bill de Blasio ran against Bill Thompson, right? I mean, was a competitive, but it was Bill Thompson was supported by most of the voting blocks in Borough Park and by the Zalonim, which is the largest Satmar sect, and the only one Hasidic group that went with Bill de Blasio, who was lagging, who was down in the polls, was the Ahronim. This was a week and a half before the election, and on election night, on the primary, it wasn't ranked choice yet, right? So according to the election law at the time, if you hadn't gotten 40% of the vote, there was a runoff between the two candidates who got the most votes. And Bill de Blasio managed by 5,000 vote margin to avoid that. And they took credit for that, right? So it's around that range.
Interesting.
But again, it's number one, it's sort of the, when you look at mayoral endorsements in general, and we'll come back to the specifics in this race, it's basically ensuring that a block of votes will come out and support the candidates and mobilize for them, and in return they preserve their certain interests. If it's funding, if it's specific laws they're looking to look, or even only have an open door at City Hall. So their deliberations are who is the likeliest to win and who is most aligned with us. And so if you look historically, if it's Mike Bloomberg when he ran for re-election, when Bill de Blasio and Bill Thompson were competing in 2013, Bill Thompson was leading in the polls, so most of them went Bill Thompson. The Ahronim took a little risk, supported Bill de Blasio, but he ended up winning. The same thing happened in the primaries in 2021 when Andrew Yang got most of the votes because he was the favorite to win, yet the Ahronim took the risk and supported Eric Adams because for them the deliberation was one, that Andrew Yang was already not this sort of favorite anymore in the polls. He was already his support was plummeting, but also Eric Adams promised them to preserve their interests, and he came to them as a friend, as a longtime friend who was there. And again, they took that risk, supported Eric Adams, and he went on to win. So if you look back at the last two election cycles, they ultimately backed the winner.
So the Ahronim doesn't vote with the Zlonim. The Zlonim will pick who they want, and the Ahronim tend to go for who they think is going to win. Is that like the basic? Did I kind of get that right?
Yes. I mean, the Zalonim they also want to go with the winner, right?
Yeah, totally.
But
yeah,
it just didn't work out. It just didn't work out for them the last two cycles.
Got it. How many? And then just sorry if I get, but like, what is the nut? Like, how many Zalonim are there that are voting versus Ahronim? Like, what is that percentage breakdown?
I would say it's sort of the Zalonim have sort of a third plus more than the Ahronim in their vote.
A third plus.
Right. So
it's like 2/3 to a third.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so the Ahronim count for 1/3, the Zalonim count for 2/3. Walk through with me what this election has been like just on the endorsement side. In the primary, if I'm not mistaken, the Ahronim, they backed Cuomo in the primary. Did the Slonim also back Cuomo in the primary or no?
Yes. Cuomo had actually all of the Orthodox voting blocks voted for Cuomo. There was kind of, at times, for a brief 24 hours to 48 hours, sort of rebellion where some groups, including the Ahronim just in Borough Park, which is, again, they are majority in Williamsburg, but they also have a large community in Borough Park, where that faction went and ranked Adrian Adams first.
Interesting.
And they withdrew within 48 hours. Andrew Cuomo came down, promised them or convinced them that he is sort of the one that will go on to win, and needed their support, and they switched their support. Ultimately, on primary day, he was the one who had unanimously been supported by all of the groups.
Do these voting blocks vote in the primaries? It seemed like part of Mandani's success, aside from the fact that I think that he's like he's a very good candidate in that he's very votable. Now, this isn't an endorsement of him, but he's very, very popular. He's a very good speaker. I'm just saying, like, as a candidate in general, he's been doing well.
Yeah, you can't deny that because you look at his success, right?
Totally. That day also, how we got here is that it was like it was a hot voting day. Obviously primaries are hard to get people out. Do these voting blocks tend to vote in the primaries, and did they show up to this primary?
So they do tend to vote in primaries, again, because most of the competitive elections are in primaries, okay?
Yeah.
In recent years, there has been sort of a drift from the block vote to a more independent vote, because the community, the same way you look at the youth vote in the general public, especially in the Democratic electorate, which is more left, more progressive. Yeah. When it comes to the Hasidic vote, the younger you go, the more MAGA right wing they tend to be. And so there was actually a drift in recent years, and you saw that with Lee Zeldin, obviously, and with the election, the 2024 election with Donald Trump, that a large percent of the community went out to vote without even any mobilization efforts, just because they felt the importance to be engaged. In this election, either they didn't feel important to be engaged because they don't necessarily like Andrew Cuomo. Cuomo was the governor during COVID, where he singled out the Orthodox community for COVID violations and pinpointed these neighborhoods as red neighborhoods. So he's not necessarily popular. People don't like him. And the case that he made, that Mamdani is this guy that we have to stop. Well, you're leading in all the polls by double digits. It's not even serious, right? Add to that, you had the hot weather. Add to that Cuomo.
I was literally going to ask the idea of wearing a Strimal in 105-degree heat. We joke, but it's a real thing where it was
Shabbos. If it's Shabbos, that is the case, even in 105-degree.
Yeah, but weather. if I'm a Satmar, and it's Shabbos, I got to go to shul. I don't necessarily have to go to vote. The idea of going outside of the base where there's air conditioning, into the street to go wait online to give Andrew Cuomo a vote, especially because it was the idea that Mamdani was going to get the primary was going to win. It was foreign. No one really saw it coming, until a couple of days before. And even then, I guess, I got to assume the messaging getting through the community is probably not easy. Explain the difference between the primaries and the regular, just in New York in general. You
also have to understand there are other two factors there, right? One is also it's the summer, where in end of June, everybody goes to the country.
Yeah.
And so this was literally June 25 was the day that people were driving out to the country. And people are not accustomed to go vote early or absentee. And so when they have to sit in traffic on the thruway, they're like, let's first figure out how to get to the country. We'll we'll worry about our mayor second, right? So
That's so
and
Andrew Cuomo's
and the
biggest
other,
Andrew Cuomo's biggest enemy in this election was sleepaway camp visiting day. Is this what I am hearing
yeah,
correctly? It's the bungalow colonies up north. Is that what screwed him? That's so wild. That's so
there was
interesting.
also
Gas
there was
station
also
children.
this, yeah, there was also this strategic vote, which was that people were saying, let Mamdani win the primary so Eric Adams can take him on, because if because Eric Adams was more popular in the Orthodox community and the
Huh.
pro-Israel community, what they said is, we hate Andrew Cuomo. Um, Mamdani's anyway not going anywhere. Even if he becomes a Democratic nominee, he's a fringe candidate. Nobody
Yeah.
supports him. Just forget about it. Let him win the primary. Eric Adams will make a comeback and defeat him in the general. And it obviously didn't happen. And that's where we come here right now, where
Yeah.
you have a deeply unpopular former governor who is pro-Israel and is sort of the natural person the community should endorse because of Mamdani, his affiliations and his stances on Israel and others and other issues, and potentially him not even showing that he can beat Mamdani.
Can I ask a question? And then I want to keep this like chronological, but just a quick like aside on this, just the Israel question. Satmar community defines themselves as anti-Zionist, if I'm not mistaken. Just they don't like the government. Obviously, there's no negative will towards the Jews or whatever, but they don't believe in the current formation of the state of Israel. Over the past couple of days, I've seen a lot online about how Mamdani from uneducated sides online, people have viewed the Satmar community endorsing Mamdani as having something to do with Israel because they're like, Mamdani's anti-Zionist, the Satmars are anti-Zionist. How much does Israel actually play into this election when it comes to that endorsement?
So there are two things here. One, the anti-Zionist ideology is a religious ideology, right? We don't believe that Jews should assemble and create a state before the Messiah comes, especially if that's on the expense of occupying another nation or doing it through power. So that's the religious ideology, which does not say that if Israel exists, we want to see its destruction. There's only a fringe within the community, which is literally a fringe of a few dozen families. They are larger in the UK, but here in America, uh, where they actually, tout that pro-Palestinian cause.
We're talking about
The
Notori
majority,
Cartel. Yeah. I
yes,
assume, correct? Yeah.
right. So the Satmar stance on Zionism is, we do not support a Zionist state, but since Israel is a country where most Jews live there and they are threatened by their neighbors, we do not seek either the destruction of Israel or the killing of Jews.
Mm.
And so they actually have a policy that whenever there are terrorist attacks or there's active war, they do not protest against Israel
Mm.
because they do not want to be seen as sort of, taking that sort of mantle of, pro-Palestinian activism or being against the Jews. That's where they do not agree with Mamdani, which is they do not call the Gaza war a genocide or an intent by Jews to kill another population. They are also very much worried about anti-Semitism because the effect of the Gaza war and the pro-Palestinian protests was that visible Jews are being targeted in anti-Semitic incidents, and the first person to be targeted, if you want to target a Jew, is a Satmar guy walking with a shtreimel on the street. You see
Yeah.
it in videos in recent years where people walking on Shabbos on the street, and a person goes and flips the shtreimel off and says something hateful towards them. So these are the people who are, the targets if you are looking to target a Jew.
This was going to be my next question. I think that this is an interesting way to get back into the story here of how of the endorsement kerfuffle today. A couple of weeks ago, okay, so primary happens, Cuomo loses. We go into the general election. Cuomo gets back into the election. Eric Adams drops out. Satmar hadn't endorsed anybody. And then a couple of weeks ago, two things happened. One, there was a picture of Mamdani in a sukkah, and I think he met with Rabbi Indig in that sukkah, if I'm not mistaken.
And other leaders. Right.
So he met with the Rabbi Indig is in charge of the Ahronim.
Actually, he went to two sukkahs, one with Ahronim and one with Zalonim. So he met with both.
I guess the Zalonim one didn't go as well as the Ahronim one went. So
they released pictures, but it didn't go as well.
So he meets with the community out there. So he meets with these two rabbis. I personally don't care what Mamdani thinks about Israel. I love Israel. My sisters live in Israel. I visit Israel. I don't like the government, but most Jews, I think, kind of fall into this exact space here. As much as I don't care what Mamdani thinks about Israel, the thing that does kind of make me think he has to say something is that the anti-Semitic hate crimes that have spiked over the past couple of years have come from anti-Israel spaces. Now, that's not indicative of the entire movement. I don't believe that. But it is something where he did get championed in a lot of places that have had issues with unchecked anti-Semitism. And like you said in this call, when anti-Semitism has been violently, when it's turned into violence and when it's turned into actual crimes, a lot of the times it happens against the Orthodox community because they're the most Jewy looking Jews out there. And I can say that because I'm Jewish, but this is the most Jewy looking group of people. So of course, when there's heightened tensions, I remember after October 7th, I've seen it. I was walking around Brooklyn and I saw, a couple of times I've just seen violence from just randos who are walking around who, run up and try to kick a Hasidic Jew or something and then yell Free Palestine at them and, and then heil them. It's a real thing that happens. It's coming from anti-Israel spaces. Not to discount that it doesn't come from the right-wing spaces. The ultra right-wing, they have their problems. Those group chat messages that leaked a couple of weeks ago, the right-wing has their issue, but the left-wing also has their issue. Mamdani does get championed by a lot of places that have led to that violence. What is that conversation like when they go, when we're attacked because of Israel, even, why, what are you going to do to kind of stop that? Did that come out as part of did that come into play during the conversation?
Yeah, for sure. It was central to their conversation because first Mamdani had to convince them that he's not anti-Semitic. When you allege that somebody, when you just pummel at them, you're an anti-Semite, you're an anti-Semite, you're an anti-Semite, it's very hard to sort of shrug it off unless you show receipts, right?
Yeah.
And for him, the receipts to show was his plan, his public safety plan, which includes an increase in hate crime programs, his vow to order the NYPD to increase presence outside of Jewish institutions and houses of worship. He also promised to retain Jessica Tisch, who is very popular in the community. She's obviously Jewish, but she's also popular in the community as NYPD commissioner. And so for him, central to his outreach was one, to say, I hear your concerns and I'm your ally as a Muslim, as an immigrant, as somebody who is the target of both Islamophobia and of racist attacks and potentially could have share the same fear walking on the street and being targeted by somebody who has hatred towards them. We can align ourselves. We can work together. And second, he obviously showed them the polling data that shows I'm winning this race, right? Mm-hmm. And for them, the deliberation was, let's have a seat at the table if Mamdani wins. Now, it could go wrong, right? It's election day tomorrow. They could hedge their bets, and then if Cuomo wins, he won't look at it. I mean, he can't.
Well, no, he has to at least look at 2/3 of them.
Yeah. But the idea that they can find commonalities, right? That we can discuss issues of great importance, even if you take the affordability issue, right, which is the central theme of the Mamdani campaign, This talks to a lot of Hasidic families. They are large families, childcare, universal childcare, the same. There are large families with a lot of kids and with a housing crisis across all the 5 boroughs. When he talks about affordability, he says, I include also Hasidic Jews in resolving that crisis. And so for him, it's a label that says, hey, here's my coalition, right? Where I don't only have progressive Jews who think that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza and who criticize Israel on a daily basis, who support me, but also Hasidic Jews who live in Israel, who have an emotional attachment to Israel, who worry very much about rising anti-Semitism, who support me.
Yeah. Interesting. So that worked in some capacity, because a couple of days ago, so, you know, in the timeline of the story, he meets with the two sects of the Satmar community. And then after that, the Satmar Ahronim release a statement saying that they are not going to be endorsing Cuomo. So that is, I assume, so Rabbi Indig or whatever, he releases a statement that says he's not endorsing Cuomo, he's not endorsing anybody. He thinks it is unwise to be attacking people who potentially have a lot of power. That was the thesis of, you know, what he put out there. That was from the Ahronim. What did the Zlonim think about that statement coming out there saying we're specifically not endorsing Cuomo?
They also issued a similar statement.
Interesting.
And so it wasn't the open letter that I reported that Mamdani issued to the community, to the Hasidic community in Yiddish. And we should talk about that as well, right? That open letter was published in the weekly newspapers of Satmar, of both Satmars, right? And each of the factions issued a statement saying, we're not endorsing and we're not recommending anyone for mayor, but here's what we are saying is we condemn the fear campaign against Mandani. We should not wage a war against a person of such influence who is going to possibly become the next mayor. What happened was, just to fast forward, was that Moshe Indik, who is the political leader of Satmar, said, I will go a step further and endorse you because I feel it's important for our community to make that statement, right? It's not only that we condemn the rhetoric against the attacks against Mamdani or the labeling of him being an anti-Semite and hostile to Jews, but we actually embrace him because we found our common values, and we understand that if he's going to become mayor, we have to work with him. And he wanted to take that bold stance.
When you when you say, sorry, just back, when you say the political leader, you just mean of Ahronim, or is Rabbi Indig kind of like the person that?
Ahronim.
Okay, got it. Okay, got it.
What happened was that triggered the backlash within that community, where 3 of the board members who are very powerful in that Ahroni sect, because they are basically the board members that, you know, have control over the yeshivas and the shuls, they put out a statement rejecting Indik's endorsement, saying, in fact, not only do we reject Indik endorsing Mamdani, we're going to take a bold stance and endorse Andrew Cuomo.
Wow. Well, okay, wait.
Which is what we did do to this very moment.
Let's back up a couple just steps on this. Okay. Why did Rabbi Indig release that statement without checking with the Ahronim board? Is that the first time that's something like that's happened?
I mean, he's the political leader, you know, who represented the sect for years in government. And he came to that conclusion that it would benefit the community.
But didn't he think that the rabbi...
He hasn't spoken to me afterwards, so I can't speak for him. But what my understanding is that he understood that there is an understanding that while a majority of the community does not support Mamdani, we cannot close the door on him. And since if Andrew Cuomo had the chance of winning, and again, according to all polls, he would lose by either double digits or by a wide margin. If he ends up winning, then all the calculations, have to be put aside. But what they said is that if Mamdani is the favorite to win, and if we agree on so many issues, especially the affordability issues, why not come out boldly and say we support him? So there are two theories that is going on within the circles, and I'm giving you that sort of to understand how it works. Is there's one theory that says that's a strategic rift, right? Where the leader says we support Mamdani, but in order to avoid a backlash or to sort of not come under fire for doing so, there's a split. And so if Andrew Cuomo wins, then he can't punish the Ahronim because three leaders of the Ahronim actually endorsed him.
Do you think this was a little bit on purpose then, that Rabbi Indig was working with the Ahronim?
I'm just telling you what some in the community say.
You know that concept of the... Yeah, go.
Yeah, I'll say my understanding from my conversations is that there is a rift, right? Because the contempt, there's both, which I mentioned before. There's contempt for Cuomo, but there's also a realization in the community that the candidacy of Mandani has worried a lot of Jews, and it includes Orthodox Jews. And so the sentiment within the community is anti-Mandani because it's either MAGA, pro-Trump, although there are reports, some suggest that a Mamdani win would actually benefit Republicans, right? But to put that aside, the sentiment is anti-Mamdani, and so those the first statement, which said we are not recommending anyone for mayor, made the most sense. Once Indik came out and supported Mandani, they felt that they need to do Cuomo a favor and endorse him. But again, it won't matter in 24 hours from now on, because in either case, right, I'm talking specifically for the Ahronim, is two things. One, the Ahronim, if they bet on Mandani and he wins, obviously they have an open door, right? If Cuomo pulls a surprising comeback, he claimed that he got the backing of the Ahronim as well.
So strategically, that makes a lot of sense. Is there? Did this Lonim speak up after Rabbi Indig endorsed Mamdani?
No, they didn't pull back from their non-endorsement. Again, I'm talking to you right now. I'm not looking at my phone, so I have no idea the development in the last half hour. But
do you know who Shams? Do you know who Shams is at all? Shams Charania, the NBA analyst. There's a guy famously. There was this man. Now you get to learn about my community, okay? There was this guy Adrian Wojnarowski, who was an NBA insider, and he became big on Twitter because anytime anything broke in the NBA, it would always go through his phone. And that's now been passed off to Shams. And he's like, I can't even take a shower without my phone near the shower in case something big happens. I feel like in election season, you're like the Shams of the Satmar community, handling this. So Zlonim still has a non-endorsement. Ahronim has this endorsement of Mandani on the Rabbi Indig side, and the three leaders who have come out against him and said, we're actually going to be endorsing Cuomo. My question is on that then, is what does that do to the Ahronim community? Who do you think the Ahronim are going to swing for?
It's hard to say, but if you look at the primary and the general election in 2024, one can assume that Cuomo will do well in those neighborhoods.
Got it.
Well, it definitely diffused some of the anti-Mamdani opposition. And it works for their favor in the day after, right? If you listen to Mamdani's primary victory speech, if you listen to all his public appearances, and again, that's based on what he said, right? And possibly in his victory speech, what he talks about is, I'll be a mayor for all New Yorkers, including Jewish New Yorkers and those who didn't vote for me. Well, tomorrow night will be that night where he'll have to actually prove that if he wins and becomes mayor, that he will actually But again, if the Ahronim hedge their bets, right, and it comes out that they supported again the Indic part
Yeah.
endorsement. If Mamdani goes on to win, well, it won't matter anymore because people will have to reckon with the mayor who is here for at least for one term,
Yeah.
and will have to work with it.
Has there ever been a riff like this politically? In my mind, what was crazy about this is that Satmar community obviously, has leaders and spokespeople that speak to the media, and then or like you, who are out there reporting on it. But largely, they're not the random Hasidim, random Satmars they're not just like online talking. Is this riff? It's a public riff. I mean, this is a thing where all the Goyim know that at least in one sect of this, there is a split that happened. Has this ever happened before publicly with the, in the political process where some rabbis have endorsed one side and some rabbis have endorsed another side?
It happened in local races, council races, in primaries. I just don't remember all the races, but in recent years, Lincoln Westra, including the councilman that represents now, in previous years, there were battles between the two factions um, on certain candidates. If it's for speaker, if it's for council member, it's for assembly. So this is nothing new. But again, this dynamic that we have playing out in front of our eyes right now is just so unique, that this whole election is just so unique, because what happens traditionally is a Democratic nominee goes on to win the general election. And this is sort of, this was the first competitive election where, even though Mamdani is leading Andrew Cuomo, and it's a splintered field, the opposition is sort of divided, people are still reckoning with what it means, and how he will fare. And so it's sort of so unique that one can point to, in historical terms, to previous contests to see where the deliberations are, or how they conclude in sort of on whom to support.
The deal are bike lanes in this election.
It was a very big deal. I don't know what the outcome is in terms of whether there was a lawsuit against it. Mayor Eric Adams actually came down to the community. You're talking about the bike lane on Bedford Avenue, right?
Talk to me. This is a very specific thing that I think a lot of people don't understand about the concept of bike lanes in these communities. Just like walk me through it. Why are these bike lanes a problem, and what has happened with it?
The whole controversy is just years long, and we don't have the time to discuss that. But there's two issues. That one is that the bike lanes has taken away a lot of parking, and in this community with large families, first of all, everybody is so condensed. Everybody has a car or two, right? You have a minivan. You don't necessarily have a two wheeler car, and so everybody has either a Yukon or a minivan, and the bike lane just took away a lot of parking, created problems with the traffic, and with a lot of accidents. Now, I'm not going into this whole controversy, but that's sort of the essence of that battle.
I have a couple of questions that people submitted to my Instagram that I want to just ask, if that's okay. Here we go. Okay. Does the community, quote, fear Zohran if he wins?
There is a part in the community, yes, that fears the outcome because, one, because of his stances, second, because of the consequences that could happen nationally. We don't know whether Donald Trump will follow up on his pledge to either send in the National Guard or fight New York City at every turn, stop funding. And so this, the same way you see with the SNAP renewal in November amid the shutdown, which is also a big issue in this community, you just don't know what will happen if he wins. And again, if the fear is obviously built up by the opposition and the Cuomo campaign that Mamdani, representing New York City, he would not only represent those who voted for him, but also those radical voices that are anti-Israel, that have engaged in protests where there were displays of anti-Semitism and attacks against Jews, and they feel that that will normalize that. And so there is this fear, but again, Mamdani has spoken to it, but I feel that he doesn't have any trust on that issue yet. Again, if he wins, it will be up to him to prove that he can address those concerns.
Has Curtis Sliwa been a topic of conversation with the Ahronim or the Zlonim? And what do they
No.
think? What are they saying about Curtis Sliwa?
So Curtis Lewa actually has a lot of support in the community just because he's a Republican.
Yeah.
A lot of again, as I said, there's two voters within this Hasidic community. There's the voting bloc, those who follow the rabbinical orders and recommendations, and those independent voters who feel engaged. The same way the youth vote, those who feel connected to Mamdani and they want to be sort of engaged in the political process. There's a big it was evident during the Lee Zeldin campaign and then in the 2024 election, which New York obviously didn't matter in the presidential election, but you saw a large turnout in the community because people felt that they have a say and their vote will send a message. And so the fact that Curtis Lewa is not Cuomo and not Mamdani, I think that also garners him support. And there's also this, okay? You have these voters who don't care who is going to win, right? They have to feel comfortable with a candidate or even a protest vote. And those will support Curtis as long as he's in the race, just because they agree with him on a lot of things. Now, Curtis has his own issues. He has a past of anti-Semitic rhetoric, and has, either blasted the yeshiva education or made fun, mocked how many babies the Hasidic families have. He continues to apologize on a lot of things that he said, but because he's a radio personality, you don't know just what this person. It's not everything is out there of 30 years of radio, right? You have to clip everything. You have to actually do the work. With Mandani, it's easier because he's only 34 years old and he's only in politics for the last 5 years, and so it was easier to bring awareness to what he said. But Curtis has his own issues. But then again, because he's a Republican and people vote down the Republican ballot, he's getting a significant portion of that support.
Last question I got. Actually, by the way, you know what Sliwa should do if he wants to court the vote? Black beret.
Yes.
Right? He's got to show up. He's got to have a black hat, but it has to be a black beret. Last question that I have here. Does the community get educated on the candidates, or do they just kind of write, whatever rabbi tells them to do it? Like, are they actually researching, or is it kind of just they get a phone call from the, whatever organizer to just tell them like, hey, like Rabbi Indig said, go for Mamdani, go vote for Mamdani?
It's a good question. I think it has to do with the generational divide. Those older voters, there's also this issue of technology within this community. If you walk into a Hasidic home, you won't see a TV screen in that house, and you won't necessarily hear the radio blasting. What you will see is younger kids, or I mean, not younger kids. I call myself a younger kid as well. But the more younger generation, being informed via WhatsApp groups, and that's also an issue that I think it's also a conversation of its own of how the Hasidic community consumes their news. It is mainly the same way you have Reels and Instagram stories and TikTok in the community. It's WhatsApp status and WhatsApp groups, where you have 30-second or 1-minute clips that go viral, or people put on their status whatever their political opinion is or the news, and then they have both online engaging, watching, monitoring social media, but also the print newspapers, which has declined across the spectrum but in the Hasidic community, it's still big because Shabbos. Again, you talk about the Streimels. In Shabbos, you can't put on your phone, you can't use electronics. So what you do is you read all these magazines and newspapers where either the candidates put out their stances or interviews or campaign ads, and that's where they can reach a larger portion of the electorate, so they can actually become aware of the issue. So it's not necessarily just following orders, but yeah, it's definitely not the traditional way of courting voters by informing them about a public policy platform.
Do the Mamdani and Cuomo and I guess Sliwa campaigns have a WhatsApp expert? Because this idea, I know they got social media experts. Like, obviously they've hired a lot of people to handle their general content, but is there an effort to like infiltrate the WhatsApp groups?
Eric Adams had that effort. Cuomo less so, just because the Cuomo campaign has a traditional years-long campaign tactics, which is not matched by today's social media. And Mamdani, again, he has courted mostly the young vote on TikTok and other social media mediums. But again, if I look at my phone during the day, whenever I have time, in between editing stories or watching somebody like you broadcast your
my goal is to become big in the WhatsApp. I knew, Jacob, after this, I gotta get you to get me viral on the WhatsApp groups.
Well, again, we can talk about that, but it is definitely a medium that has a broader reach, because you don't necessarily have to follow certain timelines or certain people. All you do is all the context that you have. You just either the entire day if you have time, but if you don't have time, a person like myself, in the evening when you eat supper, or you're on the train, or you're walking on the street, or you're waiting for a phone call, or for an editor to pick up your piece, what you do is you scroll through the WhatsApp status, and that's where you get informed where there's a wedding, where the wedding is, who got engaged, who had a baby, all kinds of promotions and campaigns. It's significant. I mean, it's a large medium that has a broad reach.
So Eric Adams had a WhatsApp organizer. Cuomo did not. And does Mamdani have someone that's trying to do the WhatsApp for the community? Or?
Not that I know, but again, there's been so much engagement in this race that I can't recall another election. Again, I mean, I can match it only to the presidential election, but also the Lee Zeldin campaign versus Hochul. This is a community that is becoming increasingly very engaged in the political process, and I think it's a good thing.
Yes. Last two questions here. Has anything surprised you, genuinely surprised you during this election? What has been let me take that back. What's the most surprising thing that has come across your desk during this election?
Ooh, that's a tough one. That is a tough one because I tend to wake up every morning to surprises. And also, we love challenges, right? I cannot point to a specific development. You caught me off guard. But if I remind myself, I'll shoot you a text.
Last question here. Who do you think is going to win?
I have to keep you on edge because if I predict who is going to win, and assuming that I predict the winner, then why should you even watch the news or go out to vote? I already picked the winner.
That's good though. You keep me away from TV.
And it's also good. It's also good on election night to sort of be on the edge, bite your nails, scroll down your your phone, and be just a little nervous, even though you already assume who's going to be the winner, just because it's an election. We only have it once in either 2 years or once in 4 years, and it's first of all, it's
you don't want spoilers. You want this is the this is your version of spoiler alert. Okay, then let me rephrase that. Actual last question then. Where do you think the Satmar community is going to swing at the end of the day? Was this endorsement big enough to swing at Mamdani, or do you think between the Zlonim and the 3 rabbis that came out with the Ahronim, do you think that Cuomo has the community?
So if Mamdani wins, it won't be because of the Jewish vote, and if Cuomo wins, it will be despite the Jewish vote.
Nice. Jacob, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast last second. I know you're really busy. It's literally the day before the election. This has been the Jew York Times. I am Eitan Levine. The only thing you got to know is that November 20th, I'll be in Boston. I'm on a comedy tour with the Allgemeiner, randomly enough. So I'll be
also a Yiddish application.
Listen, you're talking to I know no Yiddish at all. My grandmother tried to teach me at some points and it didn't stick. But November 20th, I'll be in Boston. Aside from that, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We will talk to you guys later.